Kia ora koutou, I'm Janet Stephenson. I'm the Director of the Centre for Sustainability at the University of Otago. And I was asked to give this talk, which is the opening presentation for a series that the Otago Energy Research Centre is running on COVID-19 disruption and new energy futures. And my job was to really try to lay out a bit of the changing landscape that we are experiencing right now with COVID and with the potential for post-COVID disruptions to really affect our energy future in New Zealand and globally. So when I was having a think about what this might look like, this talk, I thought, what's a good analogy to use? And I actually thought an energy quake was the best analogy I could think of. So COVID-19 is a bit like an earthquake in a geological landscape that's already slowly changing, slipping here, new rivers being formed there over time within the energy landscape. But suddenly here comes an upheaval that changes things really, really rapidly. So some of the energy systems that we've got in the world today were already slowly changing, creaking, shifting, threatening disruption, and disruption occurring in some sectors. But COVID has massively altered parts of the landscape. It's hastened some trends, it's slowed up other trends, and it's created some completely new features which are going to really affect our future. And whether this trajectory that we've been attempting to develop towards a sustainable energy future is going to be derailed, as in this image on the right here, or whether we're going to be able to get back on the rails and start heading in that direction is really a matter for conjecture and discussion over this seminar series. So what I'm going to talk today about is the impacts in New Zealand, the impacts globally, and then what the implications might be for New Zealand's energy future. Both the immediate impacts, but also the post-lockdown impacts that might occur and are looking like they will occur on both demand and supply. So the implications of COVID are still very new. We're all still trying to grapple with what that's going to mean, and it's a very rapidly shifting landscape indeed still. And so I'm going to be telling my story today mainly through headlines from the media and from global energy organisations and some peer-reviewed papers. But it's such a new topic that I'm having to really piece together the bits of the puzzle to try to make sense of it. So I hope it makes sense to you, and I'm sure our understanding of it will develop as time goes on. So first up, obviously, the COVID lockdown itself had impacts on how we use energy, and this curve here is by one of our PhD students who's been looking at how electricity use has changed over the lockdown, which is the red period there. And so we had about up to a 30% reduction compared to 2019 same time. Noticeably, it's considerably lower than our summer break in early January. That's on the far left of the picture. But this kind of reduction is very likely to be short-lived. We've seen significant cuts in air travel. So these are a couple of headlines over the pre-lockdown and lockdown period. And there's been some pickup since, but air travel reductions will definitely continue for years, particularly if COVID continues globally. And global and New Zealand border controls are going to impact on things like tourism, international business, personal travel, and has huge implications for aviation fuels and also greenhouse gas emissions. We've obviously had massive impacts on road travel as well under the COVID experience, and most of us have seen busy roads, normally busy roads, so quiet that we could walk down them and cycle down them with complete impunity, and it was very enjoyable. Those impacts are already lessening, and they're likely to return to the same or similar levels after COVID restrictions are lifted completely. There may be some carryover of active transport. Some people who've got more accustomed to walking and cycling may want to continue that. We'll just have to see. But there have been considerable upsides from that lockdown, and one of those is the dramatic improvements in air quality, both in Auckland and around the world in major cities, and also a significant reduction in accidents, obviously car crashes in particular. We've also seen this big change to working from home, and this is likely to be a bit of a permanent shift for at least a portion of the population. People are enjoying working from home. The corporations can see benefits in it, and some of these longer term implications may actually have bearing on energy use. For example, we may see more residential energy consumption compared to corporate energy consumption. And certainly the normalisation of video conferencing is very likely to have impacts on business related travel, both domestically and internationally, both for cost reasons and also for convenience reasons. People have just become accustomed to the idea of things like Zoom, as per our meeting today, in fact. Online shopping is another one. We've seen this big uptick in online shopping. That graph at the bottom just shows what the lockdown's done to people's shopping habits online. And this again is seen to be potentially a big long-term shift in shopping behaviour towards online shopping. But it also itself will have energy implications and increased courier traffic, which can be incredibly inefficient. Because if one courier is trying to deliver one parcel 3 times to one place, then that's a lot of travel for one small item, and so that has implications for both congestion and ultimately, to a small extent, for more consumption of oils. So those are a few of the immediate impacts we can see within New Zealand from the COVID lockdown. But let's just have a look globally as well. And here the picture becomes much more interesting and much more complex. So first of all, here's some results from a couple of pieces of work that have been done by McKinsey on the left and by Nielsen polling on the right. And these are significant reports looking at what's happening in terms of consumer behaviour and expectations as a result of COVID that might have a longer term implications for how we live, and obviously for energy use in the main part as well. So the report suggests that we're going to increase digital familiarity that I've already mentioned, online ordering, video conferencing, things like telemedicine, online education are going to be continuing interests of people and likely to continue. Increased concern for health and healthy living is certainly in there. People are expecting to not travel as much in the future. There's a growing importance of the community or the neighbourhood for people, a growing interest in the local environment, and a growing interest also in the credentials of food and other products that they're starting to pick up. That interest was already there, but the COVID experience and the concern for health is actually starting to build this broader interest and more rapid interest in food and product credentials. We're also seeing a massive road passenger transport reduction globally. And so this graph is just showing how the change occurred in a number of countries. So the dotted line is the world reduction in passenger transport. And that's about a 50% reduction globally by week 14. There's no reason to think that won't pick up again for the most part, although it might be well impacted by the recession that is undoubtedly going to be upon us as we speak. We've also obviously seen a reduction in aviation, and this indicates, this bit of work here indicates that for 2020, they're estimating around 50% reduction in aviation, or what they call revenue passenger kilometres in the aviation industry for the year 2020. Obviously, this has big implications for the consumption of aviation fuels, and there may well be longer term impacts due to ongoing border restrictions. All of these kinds of trends are leading to a massive drop in global energy demand, and the International Energy Agency calls this the biggest shock since World War II. And their estimation is that there will be about a 6% global reduction in energy demand for 2020, and they liken this to the equivalent of losing the entire energy demand of India for the year. What we're also seeing is some other major implications. One of them is that the falling demand for electricity, bearing in mind that a lot of electricity around the world is generated from the burning of coal. So coal is more expensive for electricity generation than natural gas, wind or solar in many parts of the country. So when the demand slows, the coal plants are the first to shut down. And this is having what is pundits all over the place are calling the collapse of coal, and saying that the coal industry will never recover because it is now essentially the generation source of pretty much last resort, and therefore with a reduced global energy demand, this will be the industry that really loses out the most. But also the oil sector is going to be massively impacted. It faces massive oversupply issues for the reasons I've talked about already, the fall in transport, air and passenger transport. And in the US, we saw this extraordinary occurrence where the oversupply led to a negative cost in oil. They had this oversupply and nowhere to put it. You can't very well stop an oil well just like that. And so oil producers were paying people to store their surplus oil for them. What we are seeing is that prices are recovering, but it's likely that oil majors will agree to global supply cuts to try and maintain those prices. So I think they're sort of in the $30 a barrel now, and we'll just have to wait and see what happens. But more on oil in a moment. So the other story around oil is that there is very well respected perspective here that the disruption of oil is going to be of such proportions that it is going to reorder power relations, a geopolitical reset, as Bloomberg calls it. So countries that are already vulnerable politically and economically, like Nigeria, Iran and Venezuela, face massive challenges, especially as the wealthy nations are likely to act to try and prop up their oil industries, whereas these other nations are not going to have that kind of support. And so they're suggesting that there's going to be this kind of toxic stew leading to unrest, more instability, and the potential for conflict. And that in itself could well lead to a lot of variability in oil price, to say the least. Another implication of all of this is that there are predicted massive cuts to energy investment. So the International Energy Agency is predicting this massive drop, what they're calling the biggest fall in history, with the implications for the clean energy transition if the investment doesn't occur. So this global investment isn't just going to affect the fossil fuel industry, but also potentially affect the renewable industry. So where we've been seeing huge growth in areas like wind and solar, it may well have repercussions for the continued growth of those industries. And here's just on this diagram, I've just stuck an arrow here just to indicate the size of the drop in energy investment globally that's likely to occur. So it's not just the impacts of the energy demand reductions in themselves. There are also going to be much longer term impacts from the global recession that is undoubtedly occurring. May well even be called a depression in times to come, but we're not quite brave enough to call it that yet. So this in itself, a global recession in terms of production, business productivity, consumption, has implications for energy demand and investments. And this could last for a number of years, not just for 2020. And so the IMF is suggesting at least a 3% global contraction from a short-lived outbreak, but this could be much worse if COVID ends up being a recurring outbreak over years to come. So just a little segue over to what does this mean for global greenhouse gas emissions. This is an interesting one. Here's some work from a paper just out in Nature Climate Change, and these people have been looking at how the lockdowns across the world have led to an almost inconceivable drop in emissions over a very short period of time. So here we go. I've just circled that drop, indicating it in a decade by decade type time frame, and then the graph on the right just shows how that drop's played out over January to May this year. What that drop looks like is about a 17% reduction in daily global carbon emissions by early April 2020, compared with mean 2019 levels. It sounds wonderful, but this actually translates to around about probably a 4 to 7% reduction in emissions for the year, depending on how long these lockdowns last for. But will this save us? The answer is no. I think a lot of people have become somewhat excited to think that we can reduce greenhouse gas emissions just like that, and it's going to give us some breathing space. But all indications are that this is not going to be the case. So the 2020 forecast is that red dot on the right of the graph there, just showing actually quite significantly how big a drop it is compared to things like the financial crash of the mid-2000s and other various oil shocks over time. So it is a really significant reduction, but it has only won us this 4 to 7% reductions for only 1 year, and that has involved the most extreme behaviour change you can imagine, and that really will not be sustained. So those benefits that we've gained from lockdowns will not be continued. And the fact is, to get to net zero by 2050 and stay within a safe global warming range, ideally under 1.5 degrees C, we have to keep reducing emissions at a similar rate to this year, every year, for the next 30 years. That's a massive call. It shows how relatively little can be delivered just from behaviour change alone, even the most extreme behaviour change, even if this was kept up. So it's clear, if we're going to get there, that further gains have to come from systemic change, from infrastructure changes, from green investments, shifts to different technologies, fuel switching, smarter energy systems, and supportive policies and massive changes to the way we do energy markets and the institutions under which energy decisions are made. So this holds out a little bit of hope that change can happen, but it could so easily be derailed, and it's a big jump to continue to keep up this sort of reduction year upon year upon year. So what does this mean for the future? Well, the first point to make is really that COVID is just one of many risks, and the Global Risks Report put out earlier this year by the World Economic Forum, one of the things it does is it comes up with an array of the major risks to the global economy, and on the horizontal axis it's the likelihood of those risks occurring, and on the vertical axis it's the impact. So let's just look at the very top of that. So we've got the highest impact and the highest likelihood in the right hand quadrant. So here is the risk and impact of infectious diseases. That's the COVID that we're experiencing. Over here, with much higher likelihood and much higher impact, are things like climate action failure, biodiversity loss, extreme weather, water crises, and so forth. So what I'm suggesting here is that the COVID experience and the impact of it are pale to insignificance compared to some of these bigger impacts that are staring us over the coming decades. And so any decisions we're making about our energy future has to take into account those risks, as well as the risks and impacts of COVID and any other pandemics. So to look at what the future energy system might look like, the World Energy Council did a global survey of experts and leaders around what are the top impacts we might expect on energy systems beyond 1 year. And there was a high level of agreement on these points. So increases in residential electricity demand, for example, from working from home, decreases in industrial demand for obvious reasons, decreases in oil and coal consumption, supply chain disruptions, and that's something that New Zealand needs to be well aware of, and delays in renewable generation construction. So a high level of agreement on those impacts. Divided views on whether we would see increased investment in clean tech and renewable energy vectors. Some people thought that would occur, others thought not, and divided views on whether we would actually be able to achieve decarbonisation of energy systems over the longer term. And all of them made it very clear that whether we get one way or the other on these points, absolutely depends on government investments and government policies. You'll note here also that these impacts they're talking about are on both the demand side and the supply side of energy systems. It's not just one or the other, it's both. Around the world also, we've seen calls for a green recovery, or other phrases used to mean let's put all of our efforts into trying to establish a renewable, sustainable energy system globally out of the wreckage of the COVID experience. And so we have the International Energy Agency, we have the International Renewable Energy Agency obviously taking this perspective as well. But interestingly also, The Economist just a few days ago, the world's energy system must be transformed completely, saying it has been changed before, but never as fast or fully as must happen now. It's not might, it's must. And again, all of these calls stress the key role of governments in these post-COVID stimulus packages and in their longer-term policies. So let's just finish with a little bit of a scan over what I think some of the implications might be for New Zealand, and I'm hoping that our subsequent seminars can flesh these out and take them further, and maybe disagree with me. So I suppose to start with, we've got to say that there are many uncertainties about things like the ongoing COVID developments in our trading partners, uncertainties about economic impacts, supply chain impacts, uncertainties about what that might mean for investments, energy investments globally, and what government stimulus packages might look like. But some of the implications for New Zealand might include such things like increasing working from home, and the implication there might be we need to put a lot more effort into the efficiency of home heating and appliances if a lot of workers are actually going to be working from their home situations. Another implication of Zoom, less work-related travel, maybe less transport on the road, and more opportunity for people to use other forms of transport if the roads free up a bit. A stronger interest in localisation. So is this going to lead to a greater interest in local energy resilience at a community level, at a regional level, and certainly at a national level? Ongoing border controls, they're likely to continue for some time. Is this going to lead to new forms of tourism, a reinvention of tourism, and also forms of virtual travel? I have no idea what they might look like, but who knows what might be possible. The economic impacts, New Zealand and the world are going to be economically affected for time to come. So are we going to see an increase in energy poverty? And if so, what can we do to preclude that really having a serious impact on people's health and well-being? Supply chain disruptions, are they going to affect new energy infrastructure that's planned? New Zealand, for example, has a lot of planned wind farms, but if we can't actually get the wind farm components to New Zealand or have them constructed in the first place, is this going to mean that we can't build additional renewable energy infrastructure? Are we going to see a desire to reduce reliance on global fuel supplies, for example, if we're going to have potentially much greater variability in fossil fuel prices? Maybe we want to try and sterilise ourselves against that and reduce our reliance even faster than we otherwise would. With the oil price collapse, are we going to see no new oil exploration? It's probably unlikely that there will be much push for that in the years to come, foreseeable ones at least. If the oil price stays low, will EVs become less popular? Or will price fluctuations drive a faster transition? And finally, and I think really importantly, the government stimulus packages, which we haven't seen all of yet, will they support a low carbon transition or not? And I've been discussing this one in the media a bit because I am very concerned that our stimulus packages may well take us back to the 20th century rather than into the end of the 21st. So what have we learned from our COVID experience that can help us transform our energy system? I think COVID has sped up uptake of some low carbon behaviours that I hope we might see continue. It has derailed, perhaps temporarily, some high carbon sectors. It has given space for people to rethink their personal goals and their business goals. And I've been interested in lots of conversations I have with people about actually what's important to me in my life. I've realised it might not be what I thought it was. And I've been excited at the number of businesses who are seeing this as an opportunity to rethink their business direction as well as many new businesses actually being set up and begun during the COVID break lockdown. I think COVID has also revealed how New Zealanders will work for the common good, and I think that stands us in good stead for our aspirations to get to a low carbon future. It has increased our focus on local and national resilience, and I think given a little bit of scepticism to wholesale globalisation. I think globalisation has a lot of benefits, but there are also some downsides, and we've been seeing those over the last couple of months. And it's also provided governments and businesses with the opportunity to be radical, whether they are or not, remains to be seen, but certainly the opportunity is there. And I think that together these could add up to building a much more resilient and sustainable energy system if the will is there, if the right stimulus packages are in place, and people decide to work together to try and make this transition occur. But I just want to leave you with one last slide that actually, to me, is quite a scary slide. And this is from an interview with Christiana Figueres, who led the Paris Agreement negotiations for the UN. She was on Radio New Zealand just a few days ago. She made the point that we thought we had 10 years to turn things around. So that between 2020 and 2030 would be the years that we put our huge investments into turning the world into a low carbon world, to actually putting in place the infrastructure, the new forms of transport, the new energy generation facilities for this low carbon future. She says what COVID is meaning is that all of the money that governments would usually have spent in these things is being spent on economic recovery packages. So $10 to $20 trillion is likely to be spent probably within the next 18 months. And that won't be repeated. It'll all be gone. And she makes the point that if they don't support a fast, low carbon transition, we've basically blown our chance to keep the world to 1.5 to 2 degrees. I'll leave you with that scary thought and open up for discussion. Thank you.
Great, thanks very much, Janet. That was a wonderful overview and left us with some sobering points there. I guess we can just open this up to questions and comments. There's been maybe I'll start off, there's been a couple of questions or comments in the chat box that I'll just sort of pick up on, and then other people can, I guess, raise their hand or send a message in the chat box, and we'll monitor that. But Carolyn has a question about, and Carolyn, you can correct me if I'm wrong, or if you want to ask it yourself. But I'm interpreting it as a collective action problem. COVID has demonstrated that we are able to take significant collective action around a particular problem. And the question is, why hasn't that, or how do we make or ensure that those kind of collective responsibilities can translate to things like climate change and water and biodiversity, where we haven't seen as much sort of collective action in that regard? If that captures it, Carolyn?
Yeah, I mean, I might kick off, but obviously this is a conversation, not necessarily me giving my views. But I think as a species, we're actually really good at dealing with immediate problems, and COVID has been an immediate problem. It's risen very fast. It required a really quick response. We've come together to deliver that response, and we've seen a result, which is great. I think we find it much harder to develop that kind of impetus and that desire to change our behaviour so quickly if it's a longer term problem. But I don't think that means it's impossible, but I do think it's a much bigger and more complex issue about building a shared vision that everybody buys into for whatever reason, and that we can build a collective effort where everybody can see they've got a part to play. And that is importantly from government and major business sectors right through to families. And I hope the message came through very much in my talk that is about the limitations of what we can do as individuals. We can do quite a lot with a big impact on our own personal livelihoods, but a lot of the impetus has to come from much bigger scales than we can influence as individuals. And so building that collective vision requires a commitment from those more influential organisations and sectors to actually buy into that and help make it happen alongside everybody else.
Other questions or comments or responses?
There's a nice chat happening in the chat box here about this, so I hope you can all see this.
Janet, I had a question. This is Dawn.
Hi.
Hi. One of the things you talked about is working from home and the energy impacts on that. And some of the literature I've been looking at suggests that in general, in normal circumstances, working from home actually doesn't pencil out that well in terms of energy savings because people take extra trips to run errands, like they run their home heating, all the rest of it. So could you talk about, sort of the other kind of more systemic sorts of changes that would have to happen to make working from home sort of a net sustainable type of a phenomenon in the future?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think working from home is all it's doing is really it's shifting the energy and economic burden from one place to another. And you're quite right. If that's going to be a sustainable outcome in every measure of sustainability, there's a lot of things we have to put attention to. But just in energy terms, because this is an energy audience, I mean, I think that one critical thing that, in fact, a lot of us are very interested in is that New Zealand's housing stock is absolutely appalling. It's inefficient. It's largely poorly heated, and it wastes a lot of energy. And we could do so much better. So, I would hope that, I mean, one of the good things about the government stimulus package announced to date is some investment in or further investment in retrofitting homes. But I think we could go a lot further and do something like Scandinavian countries, which is mass retrofit to very, very high standards right across the entire housing stock of a nation, which has huge health benefits, well-being benefits, and also greatly dampens the demand curve or the variability in demand, which makes the managing of energy systems so complicated. So, I mean, I could go on, but I think that is an absolutely critical issue. That working from home, I mean, it's already a critical issue, but if we're going to see a mass movement to working from home, having warm, dry, comfortable, easy to heat and efficient houses is an absolutely critical part of that.
just trying to monitor the chat box, and a lot of discussion around that healthy homes and the connection to well-being. And I guess there's also this this comment from Scott. We know a lot of the answers already. Those solutions are out in front of us. It's about sort of generating the political will to make them stick and sort of increase the adoption of these kinds of solutions. And so I guess his question and comment is, how do we generate that political will?
Well, we've got an election coming up, and we've all got a vote and a voice. Yeah, I mean, now is as good a time as any that we're going to have. I think the upcoming elections suggest that we will have the opportunity to maintain some version of the current government for some time, but they just need to have their will about a renewable and sustainable future strengthened. And so any way that you can assist in that, I think, is important. I mean, that's my off-the-cuff response. There may be some other ones. So yeah, I think at this point in time, it's going to be very much a political question, because whatever government is in place is going to be continuing to invest money and also to create partnerships with industry, with iwi and others going forward to try and keep the economy stimulated. And if stimulating the economy is, if investing in energy innovations for a sustainable future is pushed as an excellent way to get win-win benefits both in the short and long term, then I think we should be arguing for those.
Alex, a question or comment there?
It's just what I put in the chat. Thank you, Janet, for a great talk. It's very stimulating, of lots of conversation, as you can see in the chat. I guess I'm just wondering about the Ashley Bloomfield effect, and wondering whether, given how much people now kind of have a renewed respect for public health expertise, whether people think that this is a good time for public health people to be talking about a green post-COVID response, whether that is one way of growing political will.
I mean, my view would be yes and rather than yes but. So I think definitely it would be great to have public health physicians sharing their views on this, Alex. It's yeah, make hay while the sun shines. So if you've got the ear of government and the ear of the community, it's really great to use that while you can, particularly for these longer term health issues, not just focusing on the short term ones, but the longer term ones as well. But I'm also hopeful that the respect for science, which seems to suddenly have spread across the media and politicians, we might bask a little bit in that glory as people with other expertise and also be listened to a little bit as well. So hopefully we can all end up having our voices respected as scientists.
Yeah, and maybe the Labor Party needs to be reminded that New Zealand was one of the first countries out of the Great Depression in the 1930s by building better houses, state houses. And if you add that improvement in terms of warmth and all the rest of it, and you know, not just comfort, but make big health-related changes, put the two things together to push them maybe in a better direction. So, you know, I just think it's important to remember that little historical fact. The other thing, of course, they tried to do, not nearly as successfully, was to make the economy more self-sufficient, to actually break away from what we now call globalization to an extent. And all those things have happened before and worked. So, you know, maybe, and also Murray got involved through the War Effort organisation along similar lines. So all those things are there. It's already happened before. Maybe it you know, the current party that's been so mucked around, in my humble opinion, by neoliberalism is kind of lost the plot a bit. So anyway, just a few little historians, you know, ruminations. Thank you for a great talk, by the way. It was terrific. Really enjoyed it.
And I guess the added thing there is it's not just a well-being and climate and energy intersection there, but building retrofits and housing retrofits is labor intensive, so it puts a lot of people to work. Any other comments? Or oh, I've got Patricia up first. Sorry, you're muted, Patricia. Sorry, we're still not hearing you. Maybe we'll move on to Scott. If you want to type your question in the chat box, Pat.
Oh, look, while Pat's putting her question in, I was just thinking, one of the things that's happened through the COVID crisis is the experimentation by government and new forms of doing things that we haven't seen before. Do you think, I'm thinking in terms of energy, I'm thinking in terms of the bureaucrats who have been able to write new regulations and have them implemented within 24 hours. I've never seen that before. How do we take this moment, which is effectively adaptive governance? How do we take this and learn from it and make it our new normal? Because I think we certainly need this for the mountain we've got to climb of climate. We need to learn how to take our experience and grow that adaptation. So what can we do, I think, or how can we draw that out and show that this isn't just something to recover from, it is something to learn from and grow from?
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's interesting because it is something that you know, last year we were talking about as the need, particularly in respect of climate change, of governments, both local and central governments, to become much more experimental, much more like fast fail type experiments of policy, and just the ability to shift quickly, to think quickly, and to move away if something's not working, but at least give it a go. And I think the exciting thing about COVID is that it has given us a chance, as you say, to see what that's like and to see that it's actually really effective. And I think New Zealand has been really benefited by the fact that we've adopted this whole scale. I mean, I know public servants have been working their butts off. They've been, you know, working 7 days a week and big hours to develop the response, but the benefit has been tremendous. So, I mean, I don't know whether this will, public servants and others will kick back and say, phew, well, thank God that's over with, or whether they will actually start to think maybe this is a beneficial way of doing things. But I think the more that the public and organisations can say, well, that was a really great experiment, and we see it's got benefits for other fields, then I think the better. So it's really communicating our satisfaction in this approach to policy agencies to say, yep, we think it does work. Yeah, we've learned the value of government. Yes. So I can see Pat's question here. Let me just see. Development of a new language, lockdown tracing became household words. Can climate change community collaborate on a story which becomes a public dialogue? Yeah, language is important, isn't it, Pat? Yeah. I mean, I think the language around climate change is evolving all the time, and I'm just thinking of, for example, the Blue Skin Resilient Communities Trust, which worked on the New Zealand's first climate safe house, and even just that that phraseology has lifted an appreciation. It just encapsulates an idea that it's possible to build houses that are sustainable and resilient and can actually be moved quite effectively from one place to another as they're gradually impacted by climate change. So it's those kinds of, I suppose, evolutions of not words for the sake of words, but words that actually have a practical meaning and that people can tangibly see what they mean in reality, actually helps us see what the future might look like. So I think it's an evolving thing. We can't just invent a language, it has to evolve out of practice.
Just along those lines, I think there is some of the things we can take from sort of our lockdown experiences, this notion of care and being kind and those kind of messages. And I think they could be the foundation of a powerful new narrative around the kinds of things we need to do to address climate change and energy transition and that kind of thing. It's not about sort of the impacts on us of changing our behavior. It's how do we express care and empathy for others and being kind for the future and that kind of thing. Any other questions or comments?
Go
ahead.
Sorry. Yeah, thanks a lot, Janet, and really interesting conversation. I mean, it's so hard to invent a circuit breaker, and COVID came along and gave us this. I really worry about whether it is actually possible to create one outside the circumstances of a crisis. But I really like this idea that people have become more trusting, as I understand it, in the capability or the right or the necessity for government to take action, like legal action, in the face of a crisis. And that seems to me, from a political perspective, possibly the biggest tool or the biggest change that we have in our favour, that mandate, in a sense, from people for the government to take action. If you combine that with the kindness, with the new language, with the data that you shared about how the lockdown only had that, what was it, 6% energy reduction, and we need that annually from now on. That's a really, really powerful number. That was the thing that stuck with me most from your talk, and I think it's a really powerful tool. I don't have a solution. That's just, it's not a question either, specifically.
All right. Well, I'm just conscious of the time. We're getting close to the top of the hour. If anyone had one last comment to make, or Janet, if you wanted to conclude with a comment.
No, I mean, I don't have any particular comment apart from the fact that I'm really looking forward to the further presentations in this series and the ability to maybe pick bits of this puzzle apart and delve deeply into those bits of it. And so I don't think we've got all of our speakers lined up. So if anybody of you in the audience is interested in holding up your hands to give a talk about this, I hope I'm not speaking out of turn here, Sean, but...
Yep, no, absolutely.
Yeah.
And so in 2 weeks' time, we haven't confirmed a date or a time, but we've got Eric Powell from Solar City lined up to speak. And so hopefully that will be a recurring theme. Every 2 weeks you can expect around this time another conversation around these topics, and hopefully they will continue to build off each other. But yeah, with that, I'd just like to thank you all for attending and thank Janet for kicking it off. It was a really fabulous way to set the scene and the direction for where we see this seminar series going. So thanks very much, Janet.
Thank you.
And pay attention to your emails for details of the next one.